Coalescing around the left book echo chamber exists the question relative to the construction of the 30-meter telescope on top Mauna Kea within Moku o Keawe, otherwise known as the Big Island of Hawaii, as to whether or not it should be built. I will say flat out, as was my position before my manic episode in late 2019, and if you experienced that, those of you in the Hawaiian community, I apologize that I was having a psychotic meltdown. Hopefully that's water under the bridge. So is my position post-manic episode in 2021. I am adamantly opposed to the construction of the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea, and I will state my reasons as to why. For those who are uninitiated, the TMT is slated to be the most powerful interplanetary telescope ever constructed, with the capabilities to observe up-close planets outside our own solar system for astronomers to establish as to whether or not they can support human life. The project combines a partnership between academic institutions within the United States, predominantly the University of Hawaii and the University of California, Canada, India, Japan, along with the National Astronomical Observatories, China. While a partnership between the latter four nations is something that should be no surprise to anyone, the inclusion of China should be. China, which is currently in the middle of a contentious border dispute with U.S.-backed India over zinc-rich Kashmir, which has had a historically frosty but slowly thawing relationship with U.S.-backed Japan, rooted back to World War II, which is currently involved in a small trade dispute with Canada, and which is currently enveloped within a major trade war with the United States itself, which Donald Trump started unilaterally, and which Joe Biden intends to continue multilaterally. I think the trade war should end. Sorry, conservatives. The NAOC, with Chinese government funding, is expected to contribute 10% to the cost of the TMT, which is currently pegged at $2.4 billion, and to develop the laser systems and the laser guiding facility for the TMT. But the NAOC has had difficulty procuring funding from the Communist Party-run government, as the Ministry of Science and Technology decided to back another project, the Square Kilometer Array, with no U.S. participation, even while there is a division within the Chinese astronomical community internally, as the belief is that while China welcomes international cooperation on projects relative to astronomy, China should be taking the lead on said projects, according to the community. From the way it looks, it appears as if the Chinese government is reluctant to allocate capital to the NAOC so that it may collaborate with the U.S.-backed and led TMT project. And honestly, who can really blame China? Despite what the anti-China propagandists say, the Chinese Communist Party is not the antagonist here. And I'll say it again, the Chinese Communist Party is not the antagonist here. The most liberal academic institution in the United States, the University of California, spearheading the project in tandem with the University of Hawaii, which subleases the top of Mauna Kea, are the prime antagonists here. The heart of the question at hand here is one that is not merely tied to halting scientific progress in the name of defending ancient Hawaiian burial grounds. The heart of the question is a matter of national sovereignty. In 1893, the Hawaiian monarchy under the reign of Queen Liliuokalani of the House of Kalakaua was usurped by a 7 decades-long white Anglo-Saxon Protestant capitalist bourgeois plot involving intermarriage with the Hawaiian aristocracy, establishing monopolistic land trusts with charitable characteristics, real estate acquisitions to develop an agrarian sugar plantation economy established off the broken backs of imported Chinese, Japanese, Portuguese, and Filipino proletarian migrants under the oppressive thumb of low-wage slave labor, the establishment of private banking interests tied to aforementioned sugar monopoly, and subversive legalese naively backed by the Parliament of the Constitutional Monarchy, which was co-opted by that point, to support WASP interests. All of such would contribute to the establishment of an illegal banana republic, with Sanford Dole as its president, backed by the United States Marines and subsequently assumed by the United States proper less than a decade later in 1898. The rightful legal administrative body that should determine affairs within Hawaii is the long-suppressed and disbanded Parliament of the Hawaiian Kingdom. The Hawaiian Parliament had absolutely no say whatsoever as to whether or not a 30-meter telescope or any other telescopes on top of Mauna Kea should be built, as that determination was made by an imperialist satellite state apparatus, often termed as the fake state, from which its derivative was the illegitimate Banana Republic of Hawaii, dictated by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant businessmen. Then there is the University of Hawaii, which was officially established in 1907, during the period when the illegal Banana Republic of Hawaii was in its unlawful transitory American territorial stage. Make no bones about it, the University of Hawaii at its inception was the invention of the Banana Republic, created to extract capital from both the imported and dispossessed in the name of higher learning, as a means to retain their unlawful Aina monopoly, while at present the University of Hawaii disingenuously feigns support for embattled Kanakas with a barrage of liberal activist professors in their ploy who promulgate the superstructural aesthetic of cultural decolonization, all the while, the university ignores their own liberal activist professors, while the university makes a literal attempt to colonize Mauna Kea, despite the objections of the culturally and politically dispossessed. Interestingly enough, another circumstance of contradiction thus arises. As a Marxist-Leninist, am I not supposed to be someone who is against the concept of monarchy, on the same premise that Mao was against monarchy in China, and which Lenin was against monarchy in Russia, and which Nkrumah was against monarchy in Ghana? Truth be told, yes. 99.9% of the time, I am fundamentally opposed to the concept of monarchy, whether the practice is absolute, like in Saudi Arabia, constitutional, like in Great Britain, or indirect, like in North Korea, which, while is communist, has embraced hereditary succession as an administrative model. And while that aspect is to be frowned upon, such should be a question solely reserved for North Koreans. Personally, I view the concept of monarchy and aristocracy to be backward, archaic, and related to colonialism and imperialism. It's also related to slavery and exploitation, and is the antithesis of proletarian dictatorship. Monarchy, the original adversary of Marxist-Leninism, should and ought to be dissolved by the end of the 21st century. However, with that stated, the Hawaiian monarchy is an extraordinary exception. While from a historical perspective, I make it no secret that I am very critical of how the Kamehameha dynasty was initially established, appropriating Western European technology and later style to subjugate 7 of the 8 Hawaiian islands, except for Kauai. They were doing their own thing for a bit. Law of the splintered paddle notwithstanding, which serves as a superbly commendable model as applied to providing care for the elderly and the poor, which should be applied by all nations. Historical criticism aside, despite being compromised by Western European influence, the monopolistic descendants of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant missionaries who used the death of the impressionable Haneri Abukadaya as an excuse to spread the gospel to the Aina, even with the contextual norms and standards of the late Victorian era, a decade removed from the death of Karl Marx, the descendants of the New England missionaries knew damn well what they were doing by usurping an established Polynesian kingdom, which by that point was modernized, Christianized, and internationally recognized as the center of the Pacific Sea trade. What do you think provided the blueprint for the CIA to later back counter-revolutionary coups to undermine and dismantle socialist regimes? Do not look at Sanford Dole as a Columbus. No, Sanford Dole was no Columbus. Sanford Dole was Augusto Pinochet, while Augusto Pinochet's parents were still in diapers. On that premise, contemporary Marxist-Leninists should take the position of unconditionally supporting Aloha Aina, Hawaiian patriotism, and the struggle of the Kanaka Maoli to restore their stolen sovereignty. This means not supporting Tulsi Gabbard, sorry, and respecting the wishes of the Kanaka peoples regarding their internal question as to whether or not the monarchy should be revived or whether or not they will embrace socialism with Kanaka characteristics. Who knows? Back to the subject of the main interest behind the TMT properly. Unrepentantly spearheading the project is the ultra-liberal University of California. Despite the demands of Kanakas, who are culturally conservative in terms of respect for elders and preserving their traditions, for the University of California to divest from the TMT, we are seeing yet again another example of the University of California projecting its unwanted, pretentious philosophy of knowing what is best for society, even when society doesn't know it, onto others. The University of California is the cradle of so-called cancel culture, the facilitator of all the ideas which percolate throughout the contemporary Western left. They are at the forefront of everything which stupefied, idiotic, reactionary Trump supporters inaccurately label as socialism, which it's not. Critical race theory, critical gender theory, and even contemporary decolonization theory. But here we go again with the American liberal tradition of saying one thing while doing something else. The University of California has absolutely no problem projecting colonialism in the name of their own financial interests and influence. If UCal engineers designed a breakthrough oil refining method which produced no carbon emissions, pipelines would get built anyway, despite objections, so long as the UCal name is attached to it. Just like what they are attempting to do with a 30-meter telescope. The philosophical rhetoric has no bearing on the materialistic rhetoric of the financial bottom line. UCal may preach decolonization, but has no problem colonizing if they're the ones doing it, as we plainly see with Mauna Kea. In closing, those who should have the final say as to whether or not the 30-meter telescope gets built in Hawaii is not the People's Republic of China, and they don't seem to be all that enthusiastic about supporting the TMT right now. Not any nation affiliated or unaffiliated with the United Nations, not the United Nations, not the U.S. federal government, not the fake state government derivative from the Banana Republic of Hawaii, not the University of Hawaii, not the University of California, but the innumerable descendants of Hanala'anui, I hope I said that right, and his contemporaries. This is from the book Ruling Chiefs of Hawaii, which is basically anyone who is Kanaka Maoli and who thus remains loyal to the proposed 1893 Constitution of Queen Liliuokalani. The proposed Constitution was set to become law of the Aina before the United States Marines, at the behest of WASP cash crop barons, illegally interrupted that process as a means to maximize their profits absent of paying tariffs and duties to the United States and to protect their monopoly of blood money. And, were the Queen, hypothetically, ever to get wind of the Communist Manifesto, which was going around Europe at the time, and use the power of the Hawaiian Kingdom to seize the assets of the capitalists and redistribute the profits accumulated from the sugar monopoly to the subjects living within the Hawaiian Kingdom. Being against the 30-meter telescope is not a position that is rooted against scientific progress. Scientific progress is a good thing. Intergalactic examination via internal cooperation is a good thing. Being anti-TMT is a position that is rooted on the premise that the internationally recognized Hawaiian Kingdom is illegally occupied, without a living monarch or a parliamentary body loyal to the monarch to greenlight such a project. Therefore, without a living monarch or a parliamentary body loyal to that monarch, it falls upon the descendants of the subjects loyal to the illegally occupied Hawaiian Kingdom to give their consent to the TMT, and they have been saying no. The bourgeois liberal academic universities then need to practice the very decolonization rhetoric that their liberal activist professors promulgate and respect the wishes of the subjects of the Hawaiian Kingdom and back the hell off. For it is the right of the subjects of the illegally occupied Hawaiian Kingdom, including Kanaka police officers, who should stop serving the interests of the Banana Republic of Hawaii, to utilize whatever means they have to their disposal to prevent further intrusions upon their sovereignty. As Marxist-Leninists, we support the right of the Kanaka Maoli to fully reestablish their sovereignty and to determine all matters that pertain to their islands, including the long overdue expatriation of the unlawful, which was originally Anglo-bourgeois, but now Anglo-Asian bourgeois capitalist dictatorship that has been in place there since 1893. This is not a question of revolution. This is a question of restoration. And all Marxist-Leninists should support the restoration of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and all Marxist-Leninists should reject the 30-meter telescope. Like and share if you feel obligated to. This is Comrade Pella, signing off.